I step into a world of water, shadow, and immense green columns, roughly 315 million years before the present, when vast wetlands spread across the equatorial lowlands of ancient Euramerica. The ground beneath me is not firm earth, but a saturated surface of mud, buried roots and slowly accumulating plant debris, interrupted by shallow pools and dark channels of still water. Around me rises a forest, unlike any that will exist in the modern world, built from lineages of plants that have transformed the continents, yet will one day almost entirely disappear. The tallest trunks belong to giant lycopsids, distant relatives of the small club mosses that survive in our own time. But here, some rise more than 30 meters above the wetland floor. Among them stand lepidodendron, with tall trunks patterned by diamond-shaped leaf scars, and sigillaria, whose long vertical rows of scars record the positions of leaves shed as the plant grew. These are not flowering trees, and they are not ancestors of modern oaks or pines, but members of an ancient botanical world with its own architecture, reproductive strategies, and dependence on the humid landscape around me. Between the giant lycopsids, dense stands of calamites rise from the saturated ground, their jointed stems and whorled branches revealing their relationship to the much smaller horsetails of the modern world. Tree ferns spread broad fronds into the available light, while seed ferns add yet another form of foliage to a forest assembled long before grasses, flowering plants, or familiar broad-leaved trees exist. The result is not a single uniform jungle, but a shifting mosaic of plant communities shaped by water depth, sediment, disturbance, and the changing courses of rivers. I move deeper into the wetland, where the surface is crowded with fallen leaves, fragments of bark, broken stems, and the remains of generations of plants that have grown and died in the same saturated ground. In places where waterlogging limits decay, dead organic material accumulates faster than it can be completely broken down, building thick layers of peat beneath the living vegetation. I am standing at the beginning of a geological process that will continue through burial, compaction, and deep time, until some of these ancient wetlands become seams of coal. Yet this forest is not simply a machine for making future fuel, because every layer of peat begins as a living ecosystem, responding to rainfall, flooding, subsidence, and the restless movement of water across a low-lying landscape. A river may abandon one channel and cut another. Sediment may bury part of the wetland, and a flood may alter the conditions that allowed one plant community to dominate. The swamp world is therefore temporary at every local scale, even while coal-forming wetlands persist across immense regions and repeated intervals of Carboniferous time. Near a shallow pool, I find evidence that the wetland is inhabited far below the canopy, where small arthropods occupy the litter and early tetrapods live among water, mud, and vegetation. An amphibian-like tetrapod rests motionless at the margin, its body supported beside the dark water, in a world where many vertebrates remain closely tied to aquatic habitats. This is an age of evolutionary experimentation on land, and the wet forest provides moisture, shelter, and complex habitats for animals whose descendants will follow very different paths. Above me, the atmosphere is part of the story, because oxygen concentrations during portions of the late Carboniferous rose well beyond the modern level, although the exact values changed through time and remain a subject of scientific reconstruction. The burial of enormous quantities of organic carbon contributed to long-term changes in the planet's carbon and oxygen cycles, linking these saturated forests to the chemistry of the air itself. But high oxygen does not mean that every organism becomes gigantic, and the extraordinary size of some Carboniferous arthropods cannot be reduced to a single, simple cause. I stop beside the base of a giant lycopsid, where the trunk rises almost vertically out of the wet ground, and its patterned surface records a growth form with no exact modern equivalent. Below the surface, specialized rooting structures spread through the saturated substrate, anchoring a plant that can tower above me while occupying unstable, waterlogged ground. The scale is immense, yet the forest depends on delicate environmental conditions that can shift when drainage changes, sediment arrives, or climate reorganizes the distribution of tropical wetlands. Farther on, the vegetation opens around a broad water channel, and the forest becomes easier to read as layers of different plant forms rather than an impenetrable wall of green. All lycopsids dominate parts of the skyline. Calamites form dense stands on disturbed wet ground, and fern-like foliage occupies other levels of the habitat. Every patch reflects a history of flooding, colonization, growth, and burial, preserved not as a single timeless swamp, but as repeated ecosystems succeeding one another. Beyond this humid equatorial world, Earth is far more complicated than the warmth around me suggests, because great ice sheets expand and contract across southern Gondwana during the late Paleozoic Ice Age. As ice volume changes, sea level rises and falls, repeatedly altering coastlines, river systems, coastal plains, and the low-lying basins where many peat-forming wetlands develop. The swamp beneath me is connected to planetary forces operating thousands of kilometers away, part of a climate system in which tropical forests and southern ice coexist on the same Earth. I take one final journey into the deepest part of the wetland, where immense trunks disappear into humid distance, and dark water reflects fragments of a canopy assembled from vanished branches of the plant kingdom. Nothing here knows that these forests will contract, reorganize, and lose many of their dominant forms as climates and landscapes change later in the Carboniferous. For now, the swamp world persists, rooted in waterlogged ground and sustained by a combination of warmth, moisture, sediment, and time. Hundreds of millions of years from now, humans will cut into rock and find compressed traces of this world. Patterned bark, delicate fronds, spores, roots, and black seams formed from ancient peat. We will burn some of that buried carbon, transforming material stored through deep time and returning part of it to the atmosphere on a timescale almost unimaginably shorter than the one that created it. But here, 315 million years ago, there is no coal mine and no industrial future. Only a living wetland beneath an ancient sky, building layer upon layer of a world that stone will remember.